Hello and welcome back once again to the Exposure Ninja High Performance Digital Marketing Podcast Extra. This is a little bonus podcast where me and Tim chat about some digital marketing related thingies and also take some questions from our live stream. And today's topic is marketing budgets. How you can get max results from your marketing budget in 2024, and just kind of chatting about how it's not one size fits all and never will be. Tim, hello.
Hello, Jess. I'm really excited about this topic. Obviously, this is the time in the year where people start thinking about next year's budgets. If you're keen, then you're thinking about it now. Otherwise, you're probably kicking it down another month or two. But it's a good time to start planning and working out where you're going to be allocating your budget. Like Jess said, there is no single right answer. So what we're going to do today is share our approach and some of the principles, I guess, that we apply when we're allocating a client's budget ourselves to different digital channels. So if you've got any questions or you want to brainstorm your own particular situation, then just hit us up in the comments and we'll do our best to do some live examples as well.
Absolutely, yes. And if you're watching on catch up, you can leave a comment still down below and we'll do our best to respond. Or if you are listening to the podcast, feel free to leave a question in a review, hopefully a glowing review. Fingers crossed for that one. So what we're going to start off with is discussing how much the typical marketing budget is, because this is it's a difficult question to answer. If people are like, how much should I be spending on my marketing? It's definitely not, we can't just say, oh, you should be spending this many £1,000, because it's very, very different depending on the size of your business, your goals, and things like your amount of revenue too.
Yeah.
Tim, I know we created a recent video about this about 3 weeks ago, and you actually looked into some studies by Deloitte into sort of the average amount of budget that people were spending on their marketing. Could you share a few of those details with us?
I could indeed. So there is a Deloitte study. I can actually share screen, or I've got the sort of the slide that they used. I mean, long story short, the budgets change massively. So Deloitte surveyed, I think, 141 different businesses across different industries. And their goal was to understand what proportion of revenue and also what proportion of total budget, total expenses in the business were given to marketing. So I think I can add that in here. So this is I'm going to read out the numbers for those who either don't have 20/20, 100/100 vision, or who are listening to this. But what we can see from this is that the range of revenue spent on marketing varies wildly. So average percentage of revenue spent on marketing is 8.56% of revenue spent on marketing. This varies though. So some sectors like banking, finance, insurance, and real estate, the mean was 15.86%. Whereas in energy, albeit on a sample size of 1, the percent of revenue was 0.1%. Transportation, also very low percentage at around 3.59%. So the percent of revenue that people spend on marketing obviously does vary. Anything where you've got one company spending 0.1% and another company spending an average of 15.86% means that there is no right answer. But the average seems to be between sort of 5 and 10% for most industries. And then if you're in a competitive space, or you're in a space where marketing spend just tends to be higher, like for example in insurance, where these companies are spending a huge amount of money to try and get new customers, because a new customer can be very profitable, and this is a very consumer facing business, then obviously those budgets are going to need to be higher. So like Jess said, I think the proportion of your revenue that you're spending on marketing is going to vary based on not only your revenue and the space that you're in, but also, are you very small going up against much larger competitors? Are you targeting super growth? We've worked with clients over the years that have been spending 50%, 100%, even sometimes more than 100% of their revenue on marketing, because let's say they're investment backed and they're just in the process of getting as much market share as possible. So it's all about how fast do you want to grow, and I think making sure that your ambition matches with the budget that you've got allocated. If you're going up against very well-established competitors and you're expecting to spend a much smaller percentage of your revenue than they are, and you're much smaller in your space, obviously that's not going to work. So it's about being realistic and, of course, finding the best use of the budget that you do have to allocate.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's why it's so important for us to talk about our next part of this topic, which is how to allocate your marketing budget and actually put that together. Because like Tim said, yeah, okay, the average is 8.7 just as a blanket statement for any company, but there's going to be all these different little things that are going to play into that, whether that's, you're thinking about opening a new office. Well, that money's got to come from somewhere, or maybe there's a new product launch. So you need more marketing spend this year. And to help you with that, first and foremost, you need to be setting goals, which I know every marketing video that you've ever watched says set goals, but it's because you need goals. You need to have like a North Star. You need to have a reason, sort of something to direct your budget towards, because otherwise you're going to have a pot of money with sort of no plan. And it's just either it's all going to get spent on the wrong thing, it's not going to get spent at all. And also having goals and understanding what you want to achieve will help you secure that budget from whoever it is in your company that you need to secure that budget from. The way that we tend to sort of help clients set budgets and figure stuff out that way is having a main goal that is like, what do you want to do this year, which could be like increased revenue. That's their main thing that they want to do, but also understanding that there's sub goals in there as well. So like I said, focusing on new launches, etc. Tim, what are your thoughts on kind of setting goals when it comes to sorting out marketing budget?
A lot of businesses will, if we've got a marketing manager who's listening, a lot of businesses will have the goals sort of set for them. And hopefully these are revenue. Those are our favorite sort of goals to work from as an agency, because we can quite clearly measure against revenue, and it's a very sensible goal to have. And then you'd work back, like you say, to have sub goals underneath that. So if revenue growth is the main target and maybe there's some sort of financial target, we'd then break down, okay, what needs to happen with the number of conversions in order to get that revenue target? Then from there, what needs to happen with the traffic volumes and the conversion rate? And then we can start sort of cascading those goals down and work out which channels are going to be the best use of that budget in order to deliver that revenue. Let's say that you've got a huge revenue growth goal, but you've got a very limited budget. And then when you work this out, actually, the most that we can pay per acquisition is going to be X. Well, that might rule out some channels. It might force you to, rely heavily on organic, whereas maybe an alternative world where you have a huge revenue goal, but you have a good sized budget, and you can see that actually we can get customers at this sort of price and that's achievable with a bunch of paid channels. You can then direct your budget into those channels, knowing that we have a high degree of certainty we're going to be able to hit that. So the importance of goals isn't just for this year, it's also to help you then go back next year and say, well, we're able to hit our goals with this budget. If we want to increase those goals next year, then we're going to increase the budget, accordingly. So don't just think about this year. You want to be thinking about how you're going to sell your bosses or whoever on increasing the budget for next year.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think in terms of when we're talking about like speaking to bosses and stakeholders, like I think it's so important that you ensure the goals are realistic, and honestly, don't be afraid to push back a little bit. Like obviously don't just say, no, we're not doing that. But if you have evidence to back up, let's say your boss says, oh, we really love Twitter/X, can we do a load of Twitter advertising? And then you look at the data and you see actually Twitter hasn't been converting very well and content has been converting super well, or Google ads have been converting super well, then it's best to have that kind of in your corner and kind of know what objections might get raised that you can say, oh, actually that money would be better spent elsewhere. Or if you want us to do that, then we would have to increase the budget by this amount. Yeah. So I think those are really, really important. Tim, I think we've got a couple of questions about goals that we could dive into.
Yes, Ed has asked a great question. Do you Do you encourage bottom-up goals based on expected conversion rates through the funnel, then having that conversation with finance? I think that there's two ways of doing a marketing budget. You either get fed down a goal and a budget and someone says just sort of go with it, or you start from a sort of zero-based budget where, you know, particularly in a smaller or newer organization, there might be actually no allocated marketing budget, and it's up to you to sort of fight your corner and see how much you can get. I think that type of approach we would use in both situations. So if someone comes to us at Exposure Ninja and says, you know, we've got this target with this revenue growth, we would then work out, okay, what is your average order value? What is the conversion rate on that landing page or whatever? And then we would look at that for different channels. So for paid search, for example, we have a sort of an ROI calculator that says, here's the revenue that we need to hit. Here's the conversion rate. Here's average order value or client lifetime value multiplied by average order value. Here's the conversion rate that we'd need to hit. And then we look at the end and say, all right, is this actually going to be achievable? So that's one way of sort of stress testing these goals and working out, is this going to work, or actually, is this not going to work? And then you can go back to finance, like you've said, and say, well, you want us to hit this revenue target, but based on our conversion rates, we're not going to get anywhere near this. So either we need to figure out how we can increase those conversion rates. We might need to look at, we might need to even go back to products and say, what products can we sell that's going to help us monetize some of these leads that we're not monetizing effectively because we've got low conversion rates through the funnel? Or, do we just need to increase the budget? So yeah, I think you'd use that approach, whatever angle you take with this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's important to note before we move on to the next steps that you might set goals at the start of this process. And then by the end, you might be like, okay, these need adjusting. We need to move some things. We need to move some things around. But this also kind of alludes to the main company goals that have been set. And if you're finding that these goals aren't being set and you need them to do your budget, the best thing you can do is speak to the people who should be setting them and say, we really need to kind of move this along. Obviously say that maybe in a bit more of a professional way. Moving on to the next topic, which is analyzing your current performance with low-hanging fruit. So this is stuff that you can sort of improve for fairly cheap and fairly easily. So this could be, for example, traffic and conversions. There could be areas on, let's say, your website that a couple of tweaks could really improve this. Or you could have some Google ads running where a couple of tweaks could really improve this. I know, Tim, you tend to sort of look at the analytics and see which channels are sort of performing poorly. What kind of things would show you that a channel isn't doing as well as it could be, and how would you use that to sort of influence the budget?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the danger is that you say, well, we got however many leads last year for this budget, so we're just going to double the budget and we're going to double the leads. When actually, like you said, there could be some real low-hanging fruit in there that could get you a good portion of that way, or even all of that way, without increasing the budget at all. So the first thing that we'd want to do would be just to sort of sanity check the campaign and the key sort of crunch points that we're expecting. So we'd be looking at analytics, looking at site-wide conversion rate across a whole bunch of channels. I'm talking about digital marketing specifically here, but looking at the conversion rate across all the channels and saying, okay, does this actually, does this make sense? Is this within the ballpark of what we'd expect? You never know. If the conversion rate's really low across all channels, then maybe the best thing that you can do with your budget is plow half of it into a new website in Q1, knowing that that's going to improve the performance of everything. If the website's really letting you down, it doesn't really matter how much money you blow in other channels, you're always going to be firing at like half of your potential. So looking for site-wide conversion rate is the first thing. And then just looking across each of the channels, are conversion rates stacking up? Do they match up? Some channels are going to have lower conversion rates. Organic socials are going to tend towards having lower conversion rates. That's just the nature of that channel. Organic search may have a low conversion rate if you're getting a lot of informational traffic to content pages, or it may have a very high conversion rate if you're mostly getting ranked for commercial terms or branded search. So it's sort of, there's no sort of one answer here. It's just looking at each channel and saying, do the performance metrics of this specific channel make sense? If no, is there anything that we can tweak change or even just chop out a channel entirely. You get some people that are just totally wedded to the idea of one particular channel because they just believe in it passionately. There was it doesn't happen so much these days, but Facebook ads, lots of gurus saying, Facebook ads are everything. And we used to get lots of clients coming through that would be just so wedded to this idea of Facebook ads. You look at the data, it's just not working out for them. And, maybe the best thing that they can do is just chop that budget out and go and put it somewhere else that's going to make a bit more financial sense. You've got this other channel over here that's performing really well or has the potential to perform really well. So let's just straight away reallocate some of that budget, and that's super low hanging fruit. So, and I don't mean to pick on Facebook ads specifically. It can work fantastically. But the first thing we'd want to do is just that sort of sanity check. And that's one of the things that we do in the free website and marketing review is just analyze, does it make sense what's going on at the moment? Or is there just a small tweak that we can make that gets you a good portion of the way there?
Absolutely. And if you want to request a free website and marketing review, you can do so at exposureninja.com/review. Tim, I think you made a really, really great point about this kind of wanting to stick with a specific channel. And even though it's not performing very well, we're currently sort of brainstorming a video about getting buy-in from maybe your senior leadership team. And there's often can be some kind of disconnect there where somebody might be really passionate about a platform, or maybe in the early stages of the business that channel was amazing and now it's just kind of not really as current anymore. I can imagine there was probably quite a few businesses that did really well on Clubhouse during the pandemic, and now I can imagine it's been quite hard for them to think they don't have that channel anymore. So I think it's very, very important to come with that evidence and say, look, we've been running we've been doing loads of organic posts on Twitter, like you asked, or like you said would work, or like you wanted us to do. And as you can see, compared to our podcast, it's doing nothing for us. If we could divert that money into the podcast, or even redivert it into testing a new platform or a new channel that's worked really well for a competitor, then you can get a lot more out of it. So just make sure you come with that evidence, because sometimes people do have that personal connection to a platform, as silly as it sounds. Lots of us have our favorite social media platforms. I love TikTok, but it's not necessarily suitable for every business, so make sure you kind of come with that evidence if you do want to sort of target that low-hanging fruit and chop it occasionally from the said fruit tree.
And sorry to jump in, Jess, but there are also channels that don't get much attention, right? If you watch a Gary Vee video, you're going to be posting all these TikToks every day and stuff, but he's never going to say what you really need is a really clever browse abandonment sequence via email marketing, right? Because it's just not sexy. It's not fun. Nobody likes to learn about that stuff. And it's all sort of old and boring. Whereas the ROI on that activity is colossal, because you can spend amount of budget once setting that up, and then it's just part of your machine that just keeps churning and working every day. And, unsexy channels like that don't get much attention. And you're probably not going to get, the CEO of the company who's just been on some LinkedIn course and decided that everyone needs to be spending all their time on LinkedIn, probably isn't going to go on the email marketing course, which says you need really robust indoctrination sequences that are working in the back end invisibly, because no one's selling that stuff. But actually, if you look at the ROI, it's going to be huge. So like you said, just bring the data and don't just look at what the upside is, look at the cost of fixing it. I was talking to a client yesterday. They're getting loads of traffic for some of their key pages, but some of the conversion rates on those pages are pretty low. So their question is, what traffic do we need to get? I'm like, well, let's just test the CTAs on those pages, right? That's going to cost you nothing. You could do that in half an hour right now, and you might be able to double that conversion rate, and you're not going to have to spend any additional money on traffic. So this thing about looking at what you got and just sanity checking it and say, right, are there any visible leaks before we start pouring more budget in, I think is really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because that said budget could be used for testing new things, trying new stuff out. So very, very important that you do that. Next up, our very good, wonderful friend, competitor analysis, which is super, super, super important. And I know it is challenging to sort of figure out how much your competitors are spending. Now, there are some tools that we can use to check that. But before we get to that, there are other ways that you can check this without using any tools. For instance, if you go on their social media and you see that all their images and all their videos on their social media are super high production value, you know, you can tell that they've put a lot of effort in, that also is likely to be a lot of money. You know, think about, are they actually paying a professional for this content? Have they filmed something big budget? And then that can give you some insight. Or if they're just kind of posting Canva templates, which actually we love Canva. Canva's amazing, but maybe you can see, oh, okay, to compete with them, we just have to be a little bit better and, you know, use Canva in a much more original way and not just using a standard template. You can also make these same sort of, they are assumptions, but they will help guide you. You can also do this with their website. So for instance, if they have a lot of blog content that's got great images, you know, is nicely set out, just looks good, you know that there's being time and therefore money put into this. You know that the research is in there. You know that they're spending the time to find good information. They're not just pasting something a little bit subpar, you know, into WordPress and just being like, okay, there you go. You can kind of make the assumption that they are putting some good money behind their blog, same as if their website looks great. You know, these are all things that you can kind of use to, like I said, you are making assumptions. You're not going to get exact numbers, but it's less about, oh, they're spending £10,000 a month on PPC or on their social media, but you can see, okay, they're spending more on this area than we are on this area, or they're spending more on this than they are maybe on email if you sign up to their mailing list. I believe Tim has some tools to share with us from SEMrush itself, and then another one called Add Clarity, potentially, which will show you a little bit more about how you can get slightly more accurate numbers. Now, just to point out, these tools are collecting data and then they're also making assumptions, but it can be nice to have these numbers in front of you just to kind of give you a little bit of an idea of what your competitors might be spending. So yeah, Tim, if you want to tell us a little bit about the data you can find in SEMrush about competitors and how that can help you with your budget.
Yeah, sure. So I think SEMrush is obviously good for search. So you can get an indication about how much traffic they're getting from organic search, and you can go through and have a look at the particular pages that are ranking for those phrases. And even though that's not going to show you budget, that's going to show how much resource they're putting behind this. So for those who are listening, I'm just in SEMrush now. I've just stuck in a domain. I've just clicked on organic research. So I'm now looking at the amount of traffic they're getting across all of the different pages on the site. And I can start to see, right, in this case, this business, they're spending a good amount of money on high quality, informational content, and they're doing this because they want that informational traffic. So I know that they're putting some serious budget behind this. All of the content pretty much that's ranking and that's getting them the traffic is this type of informational content. So they are, this is a core part of their strategy. This isn't the sort of thing that happens accidentally. I can also have a look at the amount that they're spending on PPC as well. And I can get an indication about how much they're spending on their Google search ads by location, and where they're allocating that budget. So are they spending it on branded search, for example? Are they spending it on generic terms? And how well might that be working for them? So you're doing this to work out, like, what are the main buckets they're putting their budget into. There's also a great app inside SEMrush called Add Clarity as well, which gives you an indication about how much they're spending on I'm in the wrong account. I don't have access to this. If I'm in the right account, then you type in your competitor, and they will, and Add Clarity will show how much they're spending on social, on video ads, and also on display ads as well. So you can start to work out where are they spending their money. Now, you don't necessarily want to copy them. You don't necessarily need to spend the same amount, but it just gives you a feel for, particularly if you know that they're smart and you know that they track and that they're a good growing company. Let's not reinvent this stuff. Let's not, reinvent the wheel. Let's just piggyback on their experience and what they've learned about this. and say, well, if they're spending all of their money in, search, organic and paid search, well, we should probably do that as well. Whereas if they're spending all of their money on paid social, well, maybe they're doing that because that makes sense to do. So it can influence your choices about sort of which buckets you put your money in.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think it's something that gets missed off a lot when people are doing budgets. And I think it's actually, think about all the things we just discussed there and all the sort of, insights that we gleaned from that. Like, I think it's, very, very, very helpful. Next up to talk about is your marketing priorities, because everybody has different priorities. These should be based on your goals, but sometimes they're not. And sometimes it can be hard, especially if you've kind of gone with the same budget or focus on the same things every year. It can be hard to reprioritize. We have this totally silly meme to show you where this person, quite an infamous Twitter user, is saying, they're spending $200 on food, $150 on data, $800 on rent, $3,600 on candles, and $150 on utilities. And they say, someone who's good at the economy, please help me budget this. My family is dying. Somebody says, spend less on candles. And they said, no. And I think there could well be some marketing budgets that almost look a little bit like this, where they're spending a lot of money on something that they're reluctant to let go of, but they don't really know why. It's just the thing that's always been done. Maybe you've inherited your marketing position from somebody else and you're in a position now where you're sort of able to take control of that budget and kind of, put your own spin on things. And you've realized that, we don't need to be spending $3,600 on candles. It needs to be going on something different, so there's two sort of areas that we tend to talk about when it comes to like how you prioritize these channels. The first is large flywheel channels. So Tim kind of talked about this earlier. This could be things like, setting up email automation or doing SEO or building a content strategy that take longer to get going, but once they're spinning, they get loads and loads of momentum. Now, this kind of thing can be a bit scary if you haven't done as much of it before, simply because it takes that little bit longer. And so if you've got people kind of looking over your shoulder, breathing down your neck, where's the ROI? This can be, you kind of just have to sit there and be like, I promise it's going to happen. It's going to happen. We've put all this effort in, it is going to happen. And they kind of have to sort of trust you. The smaller flywheel channels are the ones that are quick and easy, but kind of tend to lose momentum if you stop them. For instance, like paid search, paid social, influencer marketing, some kind of emails. So that's like if you're, broadcasting like individual emails rather than the automated stuff, live events, telemarketing, that kind of thing. We're not saying these are bad by any means. They're not bad by any means. And it's super important to have a collection of like large flywheel channels and smaller ones. You kind of need both of those to make the magic happen. And figuring out your priorities can really, really help with this. You need to sort of, have a look at how many small channels, small flywheels do you have? How many big ones do you have? And make sure there is a good balance there. Tim, do you have anything sort of to add there?
Yes, someone's asked in the questions, any advice for a 1 to 2 person business with limited time to spend on marketing and all the research required? I think this is the same answer really for businesses of any size. There's going to be more that you want to do than you have the budget and resource to be able to do. The same for absolutely any business, no matter how much budget we think, Coca-Cola has, for example. Ask the people in charge of marketing, what stuff would you want to do if you had all the budget? They would give you a super long list of all the things that they just don't have the budget to do. So I think recognizing that you can't do everything is really important. Most businesses that are in digital, they're either search first or social first. And having some investment in that large flywheel, which is the organic visibility, makes sense. So if you're a social first business, having having enough budget allocated to building your organic social visibility and working with influencers to funnel people back to your core brand pages so you can build an audience there is going to be really important. But like you said, Jess, that's going to take time, and it's going to feel like at times you're not getting any ROI from that. But you've got to know that this is something that we're building. This is part of our longer term strategy. If you're search first, then the equivalent is, of course, building your content strategy and building some visibility in SEO. So then you have those smaller flywheel channels, which are the things that you can turn up and down according to demand, according to seasonality, things like paid search or paid social or influencer campaigns or broadcast. Someone explained the sort of metaphor of like, you've got a jar and you're trying to fill it with rocks, right? And you've got big rocks and you've got small rocks. And I think having those big rocks that you put in the jar first, like your main core channels, your search, your social, your community building or your podcast or your video or whatever, putting those in first and then working out what your supplementary channels are that you're going to be able to dial up and down throughout the year makes a lot of sense. And that seems to be the behavior that we see consistent with the brands that grow the biggest, is that they have some core channels which they know are going to be pivotal to their budget every year. And then they have a bunch of other channels, some of which they've used before, some of which they're running tests on, and they're using that to sort of deal with the day-to-day fluctuations in traffic, or not day-to-day, but month-to-month fluctuations in traffic and leads. And they're sort of dialing them up and down almost in real time to make sure that they're on track to hit their goals. So I think you're going to have to compromise. It's just making sure you know which are the core channels that you're not going to compromise on, or you're going to compromise less on, and then making sure everything else fits around those big rocks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You may run into a thing where you're going to have to condense your channels. And I know it's very tempting to say, oh, but we need to be everywhere. But it's much better to be in less places that you know work for you and that are a priority and that help you hit your goals, rather than trying to do Reddit advertising just because you hope that someone might see you on there. It's also important to know as well that your priorities, every business is going to have different priorities. It's really not like some exact science. There's no formula. And you may find as well that something that's the highest priority might not actually need the biggest part of your marketing budget, like, which can always be a little bit confusing or feel a little bit like wrong. But this is the same thing that we talked about. This low hanging fruit is actually maybe CTAs, doing better CTAs is your highest priority, but it's going to take a month to sort all the CTAs on your website out and not a lot of money. Whereas maybe paid search isn't your highest priority, but you're going to have to spend money to make money with that one. So yeah, it very much varies business by business, but as a general rule, you're probably going to be spending the most on your highest priority stuff, but in some cases, maybe not. I could feel the comments coming for that one. So the next part of your budgeting strategy, I suppose we've really turned this into kind of a strategy here, is reviewing and adjusting things as you go. You're never going to get things right dead on the first time, especially when you're planning for the year ahead, because you never know what's going to drop. I think we definitely did not expect AI to take off quite in the way that it did in 2023. And who knows what's next in 2024? Maybe voice search is going to have its day. But for now, we don't know. And we just have to make Tim shaking his head. He's like, voice search is never going to have its day. But things change all the time. And that means that your budget might need to change as well. Like, think maybe some wild billionaire is going to take over your social media platform that gets you the most traffic, and then you're going to have to make some changes. Can't really predict that. So there's lots of different things that might change where your money goes.
Yeah, and I think inside Exposure Ninja, how we manage this, because when we're working with a client, although we might have a 12-month plan and we might have the allocation of all the budget decided across all the different channels, when we're actually running the campaign, it's not just the case that, well, we've decided that, so now we're just going to run it. Whatever happens, screw the data. We're in this direction. We're looking at things every quarter, and each quarter we get all of the team together and say, okay, based on the projections, based on the ROI of each of these individual channels, and based on the sort of momentum that we've got in these channels, where does it make sense to reallocate budget? Does it make sense to have the budget split out how we have, or is actually we're seeing really good traction with one channel, so we're going to put some more budget there? Are we seeing less traction we'd hoped with another, so we're going to move it out there? So I think it's really important to be dynamic and flexible with this as well, and of course make sure that you're looking at the data. You don't want to be too reactive. That's why we look at it quarterly rather than monthly, because quarterly allows you to see a trend, whereas monthly, you may have just had a bad month. It may have been summer holidays, whatever. Elon may have just taken over Twitter. You don't want to be too reactive and kill things too early. But at the same time, you don't want to be too slow and wait until the end of the year to make some changes that actually you saw coming in Q1. So I think it's really important to be responsive, not necessarily just too reactive. But you need to be tracking all of your performance on a channel basis, obviously. And then most of the time you're going to have sort of breakdown inside that as well. Maybe with paid search, you're going to be breaking out branded search versus non-branded, or branded versus informational versus commercial. And you're going to be looking at the performance of each of these over time, so you can reallocate your budget too.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. Totally nailed that, Tim. I think that's all we've got time for today, but we shall be back next week talking about how to do B2B marketing that dominates in 2024, which should be a lot of fun. And if you're listening to this and you think, I'm not a B2B business, come anyway, because there's always things that you can learn. And I think thinking about things from a totally different perspective is super, super inspiring. I love watching videos about, businesses that I wouldn't normally be in a situation to market, just because it makes me think about things in a totally different way. So yeah, definitely recommend everybody coming to that one. If you haven't already, hit like on this video, hit subscribe, share it with your pals, share it on LinkedIn and say, this podcast was amazing, I learned this. That'd be really cool. We'd really like that. And if you haven't already, request a marketing review from exposureninja.com/review. Any final thoughts, Tim?
No,
that's it. There was a full stop. That was a no. We shall see you next week. Enjoy the rest of your week. Hopefully it's not as rainy where everyone is as it is here. Bye, everyone.